Welcome to Make Your Mark Live. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'm super thrilled to have on board Rachel Balkovec. And she is, I thought she was in Florida, but she's in Colorado, just kind of hunkering down a little bit until the germs stop flying around. But I think we're getting a little bit more germ-free these days, which is great. I'm pretty excited about that. I think we all are excited about that, especially if it gets us closer to live sports. I can't wait for that. Hi, Rachel. How you doing?
Hi, I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me on.
There's so many things I want to talk about today, and I'm going to squish them in, and I'm going to talk real fast, like all New Yorkers tend to do. But I just want to talk super fast about sort of your, growing up and really what got you going into where you are now. But super fast. I know that you grew up in the, I guess they call it the Midwest, but in Omaha. And by
Mhm.
the way, Omaha has gained so much fame because of who? Come on, throw me something.
I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is World Series, but is there something else?
Duh, yeah. Peyton Manning, Omaha. That's all he does.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
that's all I ever hear. But anyway, so you grew up there. You went to high school there, but you started playing softball. When did you start playing? How old were you? I mean,
I
from
mean, I guess when I was 3 or something,
yeah.
as soon as we could play like T-ball. So yeah.
And to me, you played the sort of the scariest position in my opinion. I mean, being a catcher, there's like, I mean, I listen. I have great respect for our nation's veterans and those who go into harm's way and catchers. I mean, that's that's to me like, you know, having someone barreling down
I
at you or
always,
whatever. Go ahead.
yeah, I always took to that. I took to that position. I very early, I was probably the girl that just fit into the gear, which is why I became a catcher, which I think is a pretty popular story for many catchers out there. But then pretty quickly, I didn't want to play anything else, and I loved kind of being involved in every play, and I loved being a leader on the field, especially as I got older, kind of slotting right into that leadership position. And I really always took to that. So I guess I never knew anything different. Being either baseman or first baseman to me is scary because the ball's, I don't have any gear on, so it just was really natural to me.
Oh, and I think a lot of us want to know when you're playing competitive softball, I mean collegiate softball and high school and collegiate softball, um, it's the pitch comes in pretty quick because you're that much closer, and um, it's just as dangerous as a Major League Baseball catcher as far as I'm concerned. But what did you find to be the hardest thing about playing that position?
Um, I don't know. That's a good question. It's tough because I loved playing that position. I don't really miss playing softball, but I miss catching. Like I would just go catch bullpens and have fun with it if I could. I guess it would be like I struggled definitely. This kind of might lead into a good conversation, but I struggled with game anxiety when I got into the Division 1 level, and so it was really hard for me to. I think a combination of the game speeding up and having to call pitches and being a little different there, but also just some other things going on personally. And I developed a pretty good bout of game anxiety where I had trouble actually throwing the ball back to the pitcher. So I don't think that's necessarily position specific. It was just a mental challenge that I really struggled with.
Well, and it's interesting because, and I'm sure you know this very well, plenty of major leaguers have gone through the same thing. And, I remember one catcher specifically who could absolutely crush the ball. Now, line drive hitter, a guy named Mackey Sasser. I don't know if that name rings a bell or not,
Mm.
but he was with the Mets.
Only
I'm sorry?
everyone always says, "Oh, did you hear about?" Do you? If I say I had the yips, people are like, "Did you know about Sasser?" So that's how I know his name, really.
Oh, all right, got it. Well, it's funny because I somewhere have a game used bat from him that I bought at a New York Mets clubhouse store, whatever, 20, 30 years ago. And the reason I had that bat had nothing to do with yips, nothing to do with anything else, but he had hit the ball so hard that the actual imprint of the label of the baseball was reversed on it like perfectly. So it said,
Yeah,
National League Baseball backwards or whatever it was, and it was so cool. But anyway, that's my
yeah.
Mackie Sasser story. I don't really have any others. Sorry, Mackie. But listen. So you started. You played softball throughout high school and into college, and then you transferred over to University of New Mexico. But what as you were playing and you were, doing your academics and some socializing and so forth, at the time, were you saying, well, this is what I want to do when I graduate? Or what, I mean, what were you thinking about, or were you thinking about what was going to happen next?
Yeah, I definitely. Well, I just mentioned I struggled on field, but I really excelled in the weight room, and I use that as my outlet to be basically productive for the team and to add value in some way. And so I just really worked my ass off in the weight room, and I had some really great strength coaches, and so I kind of I thought I wanted to make that a career. So that's kind of how strength and conditioning came about for me, is that was just a source of basically self-worth for me. And at some point, and so I want to make a career out of it. And that's how I got down the path of strength and conditioning. Then I went to LSU, and very long story short, I just started to, I knew about some of the players that were going on and playing professionally in baseball. And I think the general public mostly does not have any idea what goes on in professional baseball, in the minor leagues especially. So I didn't either. I mean, I played college softball, and I had no idea beyond AAA and AA what was going on. So I got to, as I moved out of my undergrad, I got to see kind of secondhand, I guess, what was going on in the minor league system. And I became actually fascinated with minor league baseball. And so that's kind of how that came about. And I think pretty soon into my master's degree at LSU, I was a graduate assistant strength and conditioning coach. I knew that I wanted to look into being in professional baseball. It was also there that I found out that might be difficult. So I'll never forget, I was at LSU, and I was thinking, like, this was in my first year of my master's degree, thinking I wanted to get into professional baseball. I started to Google like jobs, came across a professional baseball strength and conditioning coach's website with all these job postings. And every blog on there, every job that was posted, every name on that website was a man. And I was like, this credit to my parents, I was so naive. I was like, why aren't there any women's names on this website? So I went into my boss's office, who was a woman as well. Her name is Melissa Moore. And I said, hey, Mel, did you know, like, are there no women strength coaches in Major League Baseball? And she just looked at me like, duh, she goes, there's no women's strength coaches in any men's professional sport. And I just was like, I was shocked. So to give you an idea of how naive I was pretty shocked about that. And also, again, how naive I was like, oh, all right, well, I'll still apply. Like, I have a great resume. I played softball in college. Like, I'm a great candidate for one of these low-level minor league teams or an internship or something. So I was a level 10 naive at that point. But yeah, that's kind of how that all came about, both strength and conditioning and professional baseball.
And so you started applying and applying and applying, and it's almost like what a lot of people are facing today, where there's so much unemployment and people are trying to apply to get jobs and so forth. Rejection, or maybe you're not even, tell me, were you even hearing back, or was it just ghosting?
Yeah. So originally I actually did, I would say relatively easily find an internship with the St. Louis Cardinals. They just contacted LSU and asked LSU if they had anyone who would be interested. And of course, I think the conversation actually was like, yeah, we've got a great graduate assistant. They work baseball and softball. They were a catcher in college, Division I athlete. By the way, it's a woman. What do you think? Listed out all my experiences. And I say luckily, because I don't say lucky very often, but just, I hadn't necessarily done anything at that point to earn that beyond just having a good resume. And they took a leap of faith and hired me as an intern. So relatively easy that way. But then after I left that internship, just like many internships, it's like, it was 4 months, and then they were like, great job, but it's an internship. So maybe next season we'll have something, maybe we don't. And that's 6 months away. So you can't just sit around on that. So anyway, I ended up moving to Phoenix. I was going to start a PhD in nutrition that I never started, but I moved there. And if you don't know anything about baseball, there's 15 teams based in Phoenix. And so there's plenty of job opportunities in Phoenix in professional baseball. I actually got online, I applied for any jobs and heard nothing back. I was still pretty naive at this point. In fact, I was totally naive. I had no idea that it could be because of my gender. I really didn't hear anything back. And you just think like, yeah, it's because, you don't hear back about jobs. It's how it goes sometimes. Professional athletics, really competitive. But then I finally got a call in spring training, and the guy said, hey, one of our strength coaches quit in spring training and he took another job. Or I saw that you're local. Are you still here? We need someone like tomorrow. And I'm like, absolutely. Another internship, pretty low level in the minor leagues. And basically we interviewed, everything went great. He was like, you're the person we want to hire. I'll call you in a couple of days. We'll get the HR paperwork started. We need you to start like as soon as possible. I'm like, great. So at the time I had already picked up a waitressing job and I never heard from him after that. So I just was waitressing and it was, obviously very strange that he would ghost me like that after saying he wanted to hire me. Then about 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from him and he said, he basically was like, hey, I'm calling you to apologize. I'm very sorry, but I wanted to hire you, but our organization was not willing to hire a woman at this time. And so in like an instant, my naivete went from level 10 to level 0. And I was like, whoa, okay.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, I was really grateful actually. And he was like apologizing to me. And he said, he's like, my mom's a PhD. I'm supportive of women. You're the best candidate, hands down. You did a great job interviewing. He just wanted me to know that what was actually going on. So I wasn't wondering. So then he also said that the reason why it took him so long to get back to me is because he had contacted all the other teams that he knew had open positions. And they all said that they had received my resume, but weren't able to hire me because I was a woman as well. And so he was like, I tried, I'm very sorry. I just want to be honest. So you know what you're up against. So I was really grateful about that. And then I set out that year of baseball and just waitressed and picked up a free unpaid internship at Arizona State. Just so I could kind of keep my foot in coaching. I decided to not do the PhD after all and stay in coaching. And then the next year coming around before I was, the off season, before I was applying for jobs, my sister actually came up with the idea of changing my name, my resume, which is becoming a very popular story. So I was just telling her how I was worried about getting a job. And I'm like, look, I'm like LSU, Athletes Performance Exos now, which was a phenomenal company. We've got Arizona State on there. I had moved to Dominican, which I skipped over. I worked for the St. Louis Cardinals. I was a D1 athlete. Like my resume was really great for a young coach. And I was like, I'm just worried that they're not even going to open my resume because they're going to see my name on the email and not even look at my resume to see what I've done. So I changed my name on my resume, and what do you know? I got a bunch of email responses immediately, and I also got a phone call very quickly that basically went like this. I got the phone call, I answered the phone, and I was kind of out with friends. It was a number I didn't know, and said, hey, can I speak to Ray? And I was like, oh no, I was like, well, it worked. So I was like, I was not expecting this. So I was like, oh, this is she. And it just was very awkward. And there's like a shuffling of papers. He's like, oh, I'm just trying to make sure I had the right name. And I was like, yeah, well, there's only one way to say Ray. So I'm not sure how you can mess that up. So anyway, I was like, this isn't a great time. Can we chat tomorrow? And he was like, sure. I'll call you tomorrow afternoon. Never heard from him, obviously. Well, I followed up with an email, never heard from him. So I kept it that way for a little bit, but then I just basically had to tell myself, like, if they're not going to hire me because I'm a woman, it's probably just not the type of person I want to work for.
Yep.
So that was it was a short-lived alter ego. However, my sisters still call me Ray sometimes. So I just learned that was really those two moments where I was blatantly told I was being discriminated against, and then also like that experience, it just gave me a little bit of hope because I was like, okay, I'm doing the right things, and it's just a matter of time. I just keep building my resume. It's a matter of time before someone looks at the resume and goes, there's no one else even close to this. There's nothing even close. Meanwhile, I know you're going to ask this question, so I'm just going to keep going. Meanwhile, I also just spent a ton of time understanding how to present myself through my professional materials and how to be bulletproof. I mean, some people have really great experience and you see their resume or their cover letter and it doesn't really showcase them.
Right.
Or you see their social media and you're like, that's not a good way to present yourself because people are looking there. So that was a time where I really had to dial that in. And now I have a course on it called the Virtual Handshake Academy, where I just had to be, just difficult situations cause you to be very creative and very detail oriented and find a way to really present yourself. And so that's how that happened. So, happy ending is that after that off season, the Cardinals hired me back to be their minor league strength and conditioning coordinator, which was in itself, I went from not being able to get a low level kind of seasonal position to running the entire minor leagues for the St. Louis Cardinals.
And that, look, uh, I'm hoping that at that point you were saying, well, look, all this hard work is paying off, but that was sort of just the start, right? That was just the tip of the iceberg. And I know you ended up soon after with the Houston Astros. So everybody's going to ask, I'm sure you've been hearing this left and right, but how much were you banging on that garbage can?
Yeah,
I'm
again, it's
joking,
like
joking.
I was, yeah, I
I
know.
know.
I mean, I was working as a Latin American strength and conditioning coordinator, so I
Yeah.
was pretty far removed from the major league team
Yeah.
when that was going on. But yeah,
Si hablas español, sí?
sí, claro.
See, that was impressive. So I read that you learned Spanish just for that role, which was really such a smart thing to do, because I found that a lot of the uh, overseas players and so forth, they struggle sometimes with English, and they're not as motivated to learn it, especially when they're able to communicate with each other in their native tongue. So it was really good, very, very prescient of you, very smart of you to consider doing that. So tell me so you were with the Astros for a while, but then what made you pivot to go overseas and start with another master's degree?
Couple of things. I just, you got to look at the world and where it's heading. And when I got my undergraduate degree in exercise science, we were talking about like taking blood pressure and keeping people alive. And we weren't talking about sports performance. We definitely were not talking about sports science. My degree was probably just on the cusp of like the sports science bubble. And even at LSU, when I was in my master's degree, like Polar had like some heart rate monitors were being used, but I mean, the tech was just not there yet. So I saw just that I needed to, change with the times basically. And I went back for a second master's degree that involved coding. Some computer science that involved biomechanics and more science things that I just didn't get in my original studies. I wish I had done that. However, you can't see into the future. So all you have to do is now. I was kind of trying to predict the trend. So that was part of it. But then also I knew that I wanted to switch out of strength and conditioning and into something else. And I saw this degree as an opportunity to help me do that. So and also I knew I had visited Europe previously, and I met the Netherlands national coaches who I knew that I might have an opportunity to intern with them and be a hitting coach in their national programs for baseball and softball, what I did end up doing. So it was kind of all things combined. The program itself was a year long, so I knew I would only have to sit out a year of baseball. And so, yeah, I went there and was able to be in the Netherlands for a year and able to be in the cages versus the weight room, which was very important to put on my resume if I wanted to transition to being a hitting coach, obviously. And then I did my research for that degree in Seattle at a place called Driveline Baseball, which is, it's world renowned. It's the best in the world in what they do, which is just it's a performance training center, but also a research grade like laboratory where they're studying high level pitchers and hitters. And so there's nothing like that in the whole world. Not to the scale that they're doing it, certainly. And so I was able to do my research there in eye tracking for hitters, and I'm with the Yankees. So
So
my whole life in there.
So eye tracking technology, I know you're not allowed to talk about it, or else, you know, big people show up and drag you away or something. But I think that, every major sport is constantly striving to find the next edge. The analytics came about a few years ago. I know the Cardinals were big on it. The Astros were big on it. And a lot of the old timers or the grumpy old people, whatever, were saying, no, we just play by hunches and all that sort of thing. And obviously that's shifted. But there's going to be a limitation to, let's say in baseball, you're not going to have to be able to throw a baseball much past 103, 104, 105. I mean, there are just physical limitations to that. You're only going to be able to run a certain amount of speed. You're only going to be able to do other things sort of up to a certain extent. But there are new ideas and new terminology and new sort of sciences that are coming around that really a hitter can jump into. So I think we've lost Rachel for a sec. She'll probably jump back in. There she is. But in
I
terms
turned
of,
off my video for a second, but go
oh,
on.
okay. Anyway, so eye tracking seems to be the new way, but but we'll shift away from that for a minute. How did the Yankees thing come about? I mean, tell me about that.
Um, so I actually my current boss is Dylan Lawson. He's the hitting coordinator for the New York Yankees. I worked with him for 3 years with the Astros. So it's so funny how I think the outside perception is that this kind of came out of nowhere, but for me, it's a long time coming, and so I worked with him for 3 years, and even a little further back, Jeff Albert Dylan was a hitting coach with the Astros. His boss at the time, Jeff Albert, was a mentor of mine. And Jeff Albert, I viewed him to be a visionary in many ways, but one of the ways is he actually has a master's degree in kinesiology. And so he hired a lot of hitting coaches that also have that background of understanding the body. And some of them have like strength and conditioning internships on their resumes. So he really believes in having a foundational understanding of how the body moves and then applying that to the skill of hitting. So Dylan was a hitting coach under him, and he has a master's degree in kinesiology, and now he's the hitting coordinator for the Yankees. So it just makes sense. Like, he saw my work ethic, he saw me interact with players, he understands just my value system as a human, but also as a coach. And so when he knew that I wanted to be a hitting coach and that I had gone back to school and I was doing my research in it, I mean, he was like, this is a no-brainer. I mean, he's like, having an understanding of the human body is very important in being a hitting coach in his mind. So wouldn't I hire someone that I already know how they operate and how they work, and then also someone with a background and the knowledge of the body, to him, I just think that it seems maybe out of place to some people, but for me and for him, it's like, this is the exact candidate that we would want anyway.
Well, that's just a sort of perfect segue into this concept that especially now more than ever, it's so essential to have those relationships, because we never know when one relationship will flower and develop into something completely new and better and different for us. And I think there's a tendency, especially with the internet, social media, and everything else, that we have a tendency to broadcast to millions instead of focusing on a few. But at the end of the day, it's those few people, those few relationships. And when I say few, it doesn't mean 3 or 4. It can mean 50 or 100. But the point being that a relationship with somebody and is what's going to really lead to a lot of opportunity versus just trying to just kind of go for it or wing it. And you notice that firsthand. So right now, as we speak, we're sort of on hiatus with professional sports for the most part. There are plans here and there that are starting to crop up, but do the Yankees themselves have an actual function for you to do now, or is there nothing really to do yet until camps open up and so forth again, or how's it work?
I mean, there's less to do, obviously, and especially with hitters, where pitchers can still be throwing right now, and hitters are, they're swinging, some of them, and some of them are hitting baseballs, some of them aren't, some of them are hitting sunflower seeds. So, there is still stuff to do. We're communicating with the players daily and kind of just checking in on them, even if that's just to say hi or, how's Fortnite going or whatever,
Right.
just like just having a touch point with them. And then also, like, the internal learning has been really phenomenal, and just, it's fun how, like, I've been able to develop relationships with the coaches, because I was new to the organization. So I was a little worried with that. It's just developing relationships with the people that I'm working with every day. But it's been, I feel like that's been kept up really well. And I've even developed relationships with those guys, even though we were apart. So we're still doing quite a bit. And I feel like I'm definitely busy personally. So keeping busy, by design. So
That's good. Now, so I want to shift gears again and really talk about the transition element of things, because we've talked about this before, but most athletes really struggle with their transition from their sport to what's next, whether it's because of an injury or just simply they're not I don't want to say good enough to keep on playing, but their teams decide, or their leagues decide it's time to hang them up, or they just simply decide economically it makes more sense to do something else. But in your case, tell me a little bit about how you were able to make that transition and some of the challenges that you faced, the struggles.
Yeah, I actually had a horrible transition out of college sports, and it set me up for, I believe it set me up for success for future transitions and understanding my identity and what that's rooted in. But yeah, I had a really bad transition. So basically my freshman year of college, I already touched on this a bit, but I dealt with a lot of game anxiety, and I went basically from being a really, I don't want to say phenomenal, but a very talented freshman catcher, we'll put it that way, who had a ton of potential. And I was probably slated to start in the spring, went from that to literally not being able to throw a softball that I've thrown for 13 years and losing that within a couple months, basically, of just being, I mean, anyone could have started over me. A 12 and under girl could have started me just by nature of the fact that I couldn't even throw a ball. So that was insanely difficult. I was not equipped to handle that at the time. I didn't understand what was going on. Also, mental skills wasn't a thing. It was, I didn't even see a sports psychologist my freshman year. Transferred. It got a little bit better. I went to New Mexico, and I was able to also leave, which is a huge part of identity. At the time, I went to school at a Division I softball program in my city. So my high school teammates were coming to watch, and my parents, and I just was like, I was mortified and embarrassed. And so leaving was really important for me, and also kind of just shedding my skin in every way. And so I went to New Mexico. It did get a little bit better, but not to the point where I could get in against UCLA and handle myself. So I played very little because if you can't trust someone, even though I was physically there and I could perform in practice sometimes, I couldn't be trusted with a runner on third in a game against UCLA. Not happening.
Now,
so,
what, but sort of going back to Creighton for a second, when you say, well, they didn't really have a psychologist and so forth to talk about this, but I mean, it had to be pretty evident that this was a mental thing and not a physical thing. You could throw, to center field or whatever it was. So there was nobody to say like, wow, you're going through some of this, let's talk about it? Or they just kind of said, well, oh, well.
To my knowledge, or to my memory, which by the way, I would say I was in a pretty deep depression at the time. So I didn't remember everything perfectly.
Right.
But to my knowledge, no one ever suggested that I should see a sports psychologist or any psychologist. And I actually do remember working on mechanics. And so I actually had in my head that it was mechanics, which if I wasn't aware of the problem, I didn't even know what this was. I'd never heard of the yips. I was just embarrassed. I didn't know what was going on. So I thought it was mechanics. And of course the answer is just to work harder. So then when I went to New Mexico, to their credit, they recognized it and told me. And so they sent me to see what at the time they said it was a sports psychologist, but she was just the general campus psychologist. So I went to the campus psychologist, and I don't think I wasn't open to it, but also again, the conversation surrounding mental skills has rapidly changed in the past 10 years. So I was embarrassed. I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't talk about it. And I still was convinced that it was physical. She diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress syndrome because I was having nightmares and stuff about it. And so I also didn't believe that. I was like, what? That's for military people. Like that's just, so I also didn't believe that. They prescribed me depression medicine, which I did not take, which I'm glad I didn't take at the time, but I just think, again, it was not out in the open. I don't think my teammates really understood everything that was going on with me. And so all that to say, it was a pretty rough transition, but unlike most people, my transition happened like while I was still playing, because I was losing that identity while I was still on the team. So by the time, thankfully, at some point, I remember feeling very at peace with my career being over, but I went through that whole transition. It was almost as if I had sustained an injury, but it was mental. And even so much so, again, credit to the coaches at New Mexico, so much so that they offered me after my sophomore year an option to take a medical, like red shirt basically, and still be a part of the team as a student coach and keep my scholarship. They had approved it through the NCAA because at the time, again, this wasn't a thing. So they had to go to the NCAA and ask for permission for me to keep my scholarship and so on. And I actually said that I wanted to give it another try my junior year. And so I didn't take that. But yeah, so it was almost like I had a career-ending injury, but it was a mental thing. So anyway, by the time I was actually done playing, I just was so clear about, okay, my career's going on, and I had pride and self-worth in my career, and prior to that, I had nothing else besides softball. So I just look at athletes now, and I can fully relate to all your eggs are in one basket. You have one identity. if you're not doing baseball, you're not happy, or you're escaping to other things like drugs, alcohol, women, video games, anything to just like, if you don't have baseball, you don't know what to do. So you just numb yourself and do things that maybe aren't productive, even though, you know, we play video games, that's fine. I'm not judging anyone, but it's like, is that really, you know, what is that really making you better? Is that really stimulating you? Is it changing your life for the better? So
Right.
I can fully relate to all of this identity loss and transition that they go through.
So what do you think was a primary catalyst to really pivot you back?
You mean after that?
Yeah.
Just like going through that, I think finding my career as a point where I could actually have that as an outlet. And then I've just used that experience probably throughout my entire life of going, I can't put now it's my career. I can't
Mhm.
put all of who I am into my career, because if I get fired or I don't like what's going on there or whatever, then what happens? You know, what happens? Or if I'm discriminated against and I have to sit a year out and I'm a waitress, do I still view myself as, am I still confident in who I am? Do I still know who I am as a person? So I've used that in a couple of experiences actually in my life to go, I love my career. I spent a lot of time doing it, but at the end of the day, if I die tomorrow, they'll replace me. Like I don't put all of my eggs in that basket. I have
Right,
other
right.
outlets, and it's just I've never, yeah, the logo doesn't define me. And even if it's the Yankees, you know, being the first woman to do something doesn't define me. Even if that's great, but it's not all of who I am.
Well, that's so essential for any athlete to understand fully, whether they're retired or still playing, that they often bring so much more to the table than they realize. And you know, I've spoken to countless athletes that talk about how they'll say, "Oh, I'm just some, you know, I'm just a hockey jock or a football jock or whatever," you know, and their mentality is, "I'm just an athlete." And you know, now we've seen whether it's on my website, but also LeBron and some others will say, "Look, I'm more than just an athlete," right? And it's so true that you know, Rachel, I know you brought so much more to you know, life and to everything else than just being a catcher, just being a strength and conditioning coach and so forth. And you know, I think that that's such a critical thing for all athletes to understand, is that and it may be developing a secondary interest, maybe something where, you know, you become really interested in photography or in acting or in whatever it might be, or finance or something, or you're staying
Yeah.
within your sport but you're doing different things within your sport like you've done. One thing I'm really curious about, and I'm sort of stepping it back into, you know, the respect that you got when you were doing, whether it's strength and conditioning or now with the Yankees and so forth. Are you finding that, I mean, you're probably sort of getting, I would guess, tired of this whole first female, 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 because you're like, no, I know my shit. I know this stuff. I can teach it as well as a guy can. And I'm tired of hearing the first female stuff. But maybe there's the other side that's saying, but I want more women to be in this and doing this sort of thing. I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
I mean, I think about that every day, but I think rarely about like, oh, I wish people would just stop asking me about being a woman, because I feel so strongly that women need to hear it, you know, and men need to hear it, and they need to hear me talk. And they need to hear the story about how I was hired, because I am tired of hearing, oh, well, she has no experience and she gets this job. And I'm like, like, okay. Like,
Hmm.
it's just fun. It's funny to kind of hear that stuff, because I'm like, you must not read anything about me to say something like that. And I think people in the industry who, I mean, this is my seventh. People are like, what does it feel like to be, you know, in a male dominated industry now? And I'm like, well, this is my seventh spring training. This is not my first time around the block. And so I think that's a little tiring. However, I never get tired of answering the questions, because again, it's like, I feel like it's my responsibility to be available and to be accessible for women and men to hear about this. And I think me in particular, having so much experience already in sports in general, and then also in professional baseball specifically, I think it's important for them all to hear it. So, I mean, this is why I do all of these webinars, is like, it's my job. When I signed the piece of paper, I signed up for two jobs: to be a Yankees hitting coach and to be on these webinars, because it's that important for women to have a visible idea of what they can be, and for men to have a visible idea of what a woman working in sports looks like, talks like, acts like, what opinions I might have, what experience. I mean, geez, if you played any sports and you just heard my story about having game anxiety and going to see a sports psychologist and being diagnosed with depression and start struggling with identity, how can you not think that I can relate to these people? You know, like that's a very common experience, by the way, that no one talks about. So I just think it's so important to be on these things. And I don't ever get tired of it, honestly. And I don't mind when people want to ask me these questions a million times in a row, and I will gladly answer them, at least right now. Maybe I'll get tired someday, but I'm not tired of it. And it'd be selfish for me to say, oh, I'm so tired of answering these questions, because then it would clearly make very clear that I wasn't prepared for this role.
Well, I'm obviously deeply disappointed that you actually are appearing on other webinars. I think that's such a bummer. But no, I think listen, that's great, because you know, when people talk about having role models, I think sometimes they thrust that term on athletes, on a lot of the big name. Oh, Derek Jeter, you're such a role model. So and so, you're just such a role model, and that can be a lot of pressure. But if it's tackled the right way, I think it can be a blessing. And you not only are you a role model for being an athlete, but you're a role model for being doing just what you're doing. And I think the bottom line is that you're simply showing, look, my credentials are there. There's no reason why I shouldn't be considered, a hitting coach, a strength and conditioning coach, etc. Not only do you have the playing time behind you and the field time behind you, but you also have the classroom behind you. You've got, this stuff inside and out, and you're an expert at this stuff. It's funny when people say, well, so-and-so an expert. Well, I've always said, you don't need to be 10 times as good as someone to be an expert. You need to be 10%, just barely better than someone in certain things to be an expert. And Rachel, I promise you, I think I'm a decent hitter. And you could spend 14 hours trying to fix everything on the planet on me, and I promise you, I'd learn everything. You okay doing that or not? You're right. Anyway.
14 hours. 14 hours.
But it has to be in a row. Anyway, but so switching one more time. I mean, one of the things that I guess, if someone, especially if a woman's watching this and listening to this out there and wants to push against some of these barriers that you've faced, what kind of advice can you give them?
I've been saying a couple of things, like just every year you ask me this, it'll change. Because I think when I first got in, I was very, very naive. And I just thought, oh, anyone could do this and it's not a big deal. And I just, that's not true. So like reflecting back, I think that a couple of things that I did both on purpose and not on purpose, just from my upbringing, were, first of all, my mom always used to say, life's not fair. And boy, was she preparing me for my life. So I hear women sometimes and they're like, well, I shouldn't have to deal with that. That's not fair. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's not fair. But what are you going to do about it? Like, life's not fair. So I always just say you got to play by the rules until you can write the rules. So when I first got in and I was discriminated against, it's like, yeah, it's not fair. So I can either quit and do something else, or I can pursue this and choose to take my lumps along the way and understand that, people, for example, people ask me, why didn't you take legal action when you found out you were being discriminated against? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be on this webinar if I had done that. I wouldn't have a job in professional sport. Do you understand? Like, I wouldn't, not you, but it's like, why would you even ask? It's not fair. But either I take legal action and sue someone when I haven't even started my career and that I never have a career, or I take my lumps and I continue to work harder than everyone else, and I have to work longer and take more internships and work for free and all these things. And it just is what it is. And I'm glad, by the way, I think that being an underdog and having to work harder than other people is a positive thing, because I'm glad I look back on all these experiences. I look at my resume and I'm like, I'm glad I have that foundation to stand on now. Even though at the time I might not have been happy doing 2 unpaid internships and waitressing to pay the bills. But I understand that my resume now is pretty damn bulletproof, and so it's positive. Yeah. The second and last thing I would say is just have a little empathy for people who are experiencing change. So look, it's how it goes in every change situation anywhere. I don't like change. You don't like change. Nobody likes change. We have to give each other a grace period to adjust and understand. And so when I walk into the room in a Yankees uniform into the cafeteria and I feel like eyes are staring at me, I'm like, okay, like they're not staring at you because they hate you or don't want you there. They're staring at you because it's different. So don't perceive them as hating you. Perceive them as adjusting, learning. What's this like? What is this woman like? Is she going to be able to help me? Does she know her stuff? Those are all valid questions and valid feelings. So I think just having a little empathy, and the analogy I've been using is just if a mom has three sons and a husband, and they walk in and she walks into the bathroom one day and the toilet seat's up, does she think to herself, oh, my sons hate me and they want me out of the house and they're discriminating against me? No, they just forgot, they're not thinking about it. So have a little empathy. I just metaphorically, I put the toilet seat down every day and I'm just like, well, that's just how it's going to be until people like me and people like other women that are in the field continue to be around, it becomes more normal. And then they will remember to put the toilet seat down. But before then, you're going to have to take your lumps and just like adjust and have empathy for the people around you that are not used to you being there.
But you know what? And one of the things you mentioned earlier resonated, and that's the whole concept that a reason why you've gotten this Yankees job is because the current hitting coach, and because he had experience with you before, and he got to know you, your skill set, your personality, your ability to connect with the players, and whether you're male or female, it doesn't matter. That ability to connect and that ability to really sort of further a relationship like that is what's going to carry you forward. And so I think one of the things that I would say is to people that are facing any sort of bias is to lean on your ability to sort of network your way into relationships and have those relationships that people will then be able to vouch for. Oh, well, yes, she's a woman, or he's too short, or she's too this, or he's too that, or not enough this or not enough that. But then for the other people to say, yeah, it doesn't matter. She's a great person and she's a great leader and she's very talented otherwise. I see this all the time when I was doing a lot of executive recruiting and searches for clients, where they would say, well, here's the laundry list of all the things we want. And I'd go back and I'd say, well, she only has 30% of this, but you're going to want to hire her. Trust me on this, because she's got all these other things that sort of overwhelm the stuff that she doesn't have. Mm-hmm. And they'd see that and they'd hire her. And it's the same thing with almost anything in life. And you're a prime example of that, Rachel. So if people want to reach out to you directly, what's the best way to, tell me, and what can they reach out to you for?
I'm decently accessible. If you can spell Balkovec, you can probably find me. I definitely am getting more and more requests, obviously, but I try to make time for all of them. And I actually have booking slots, as you know, so you can actually book through my website directly without even contacting me. And I have a couple of slots each week that I just try to give to the community. But also, I think that there's a couple of things coming down the pipeline of just of mentorship. And so I am very much called, if you can't tell through this call, I'm very much called to be accessible and be available for people. I have a couple of things. I've just gotten through the first round of interviews and stuff for my one-on-one mentorship, which that has already passed. But I also have a course called the Virtual Handshake Academy that I think any young professional, and when I say young, actually I've worked with people up to age 35, but people who maybe are just getting out in their career. And if you're not sure if you're presenting yourself well to employers, then you should give this course a look. If you are confused why you're not getting callbacks when you feel like your resume is perfect for the job, you should give this course a look. I think I stumbled through that myself, and it took me a long time to refine what a resume and cover letter should look like. And this goes way beyond just like bullet points and formatting, even though that's part of it. But what a cover letter should look like, you shouldn't just repeat your resume in paragraph form. You should talk about your calling and what makes your experiences unique, those kinds of things. But also, people forget the email and how important that is, or what you're writing on LinkedIn in your message. And if you write people 6 paragraphs, they won't read it. I promise you, like how to get to the point, how to do email networking when you're reaching out to someone with a cold email. I think that I've got some pretty potent points that I just get raving reviews on. So
wait a minute. So I have to interrupt for a second. So I know you work for the Yankees now. I guess they're, some big team or something. But quite frankly, I think I need to hire you because you could teach all this stuff. What the hell? No
Yeah.
one needs me anymore. This is great. I love it, Rachel. That sounds awesome. And you know what? I'm in the next few weeks, I'm gonna make sure that people can access your course directly through you, whether it's on my site. But we're gonna make this. I think that's great. I love what you're doing with that. I think mentorship is awesome. I think everybody should be doing some form of mentorship, whether you're young, you're old. The ability to influence minds in a positive way is really incredible, and it feels good to do that. I know you know that, Rachel. And for people that aren't involved with it, you should. It's a great thing to do. Well, listen, I truly appreciate your time. I know that you had what it was today, yesterday, the day before, an interview with some small entity, Major League Baseball Network. I don't even know where they are on the TV. But anyway, but listen, congratulations on all your success to date, and I'm sure you're sort of just getting going, and there's a lot of sort of great accomplishments in front of you. I can't wait to have the opportunity to attend opening day someday down the road and see you in the dugout at Yankee Stadium. That'd be pretty damn cool. I bet you wouldn't mind
Great.
that.
Wouldn't mind it.
Cool. But anyway, thanks again. You're a fantastic example of the types of people I like to highlight and showcase on these Make Your Mark live webinars, and the Win Again Academy. You've got a lot to teach, a lot to give, and a very inspirational message. So I appreciate your time, and thanks for being on board.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks, Rachel. See you all later.
Bye.
Bye.